So a warm welcome to Talking Europe on France 24. Now, as the summer gives way to autumn here in Europe, it's back to school for governments and leaders. Our guest today was re-elected for a second term as President of Finland in January of this year, and his summer has been perhaps more closely watched than most. He hosted the meeting of the American and Russian presidents, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, in Helsinki in July. These past days, he's also hosted the French President Emmanuel Macron. I'm very pleased to welcome from Helsinki the President of Finland, Sauli Niinistö. President Niinistö, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me.
Well, before we come to our interview, I'd like to show our viewers a little presentation of your country, Finland, and some of its modern history. Let's have a watch of this.
Finland is one of the most densely forested countries on Earth. It's home to 200,000 lakes, islands, and reindeers. There are also 2 million saunas for 5.5 million people, a tiny population spread out across a vast territory. Home to Finns, Laplanders, and Father Christmas, Finland is a nation long tossed back and forth between its larger neighbors, Sweden and Russia. For 8 centuries, Finland was part of the Kingdom of Sweden, and to this day, Swedish remains an official language. In the 19th century, the country became a Grand Duchy of the Russian Empire, but its 1917 Declaration of Independence heralded a civil war between pro-Moscow Reds and non-socialist Whites. 2 years later, a republic was proclaimed. In 1939, the so-called Winter War pitted Finland against the USSR. The Finns managed to resist invasion but lost the province of Karelia to the Soviets. During the Cold War, a wary Finland decided not to pick sides, adopting a policy of neutrality. By 1995, the country had entered the European Union and 7 years later became the only Nordic nation to adopt its single currency. One more claim to fame, Finland boasts the world's highest number per capita of heavy metal bands.
Well, there we go, our potted history of Finland ending on a rather light note there. But President Niinistö, coming to more serious matters, yours is, as we said, one of the smaller member states in the EU by population. How do you see your country's place in this now large bloc of 28 countries?
Actually, I remember very well the days when we joined the European Union. There was a strong, very strong European sentiment, European feeling inside us, and we haven't lost it.
And I know that you yourself represent a very pro-European party. Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, the French president himself, a strongly pro-European politician, has been with you in Helsinki this week. A major theme was defence. Now, at your joint press conference there in Helsinki, he said the European Union should modernise its post-Cold War relations with Russia, your enormous neighbour to the east there. What do you take that to mean? Could he be talking about ending sanctions on Russia?
First of all, we talked about security as a wider phenomenon than just defense. Yes, we talked about quite a lot about the ring around Europe. I mean, some 15 years ago, we negotiated with Russia quite peacefully. We negotiated with Turkey about membership, and in North Africa we tried to build up democracy. Now, in 15 years, this all has changed. Around us we see a lot of unrest, discussion and activities like Ukraine. So maybe it's time to try to build up again this kind of peaceful zone around Europe. That would benefit us and everybody else. And I understood that President Macron is thinking in a very similar way than I have been thinking, and he's active in that. I fully support his idea. I do not believe that none of us is going to say that, well, let's get rid of sanctions. No, the sanctions are because of what has been happening in Ukraine. And before that is corrected, sanctions do stay. So that is a kind of a, obstacle to go further just at the moment. But we have to seriously continue on Minsk process and trying to get killing ending in Ukraine.
Indeed, the situation in Ukraine very much a stumbling block for many leaders around Europe. In terms of Russia's military capabilities and activities, it is very active. We know Russia's about to carry out its biggest war games since the Cold War. Before we talk about that, we've got a report explaining some details. This is from Wassim Cornet.
Armored tanks, trucks, airplanes, and ships. 36,000 military vehicles will travel to eastern Russia on September 11th. The military drill, which has been called Vostok 2018, will involve 300,000 Russian troops as well as Chinese divisions. The two countries have worked hand in hand in the past, but never on such a large scale.
These international drills will be held on an unprecedented scale in terms of territory involved as well as the number of command structures and troops.
Moscow says these exercises are needed in order to ensure the nation's safety in the face of what it says is a hostile attitude from NATO. The military alliance has moved additional troops to Russia's western border. That was done in response to Russia's growing military threat and in the light of the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But despite the tense situation, Russia is obligated to invite NATO members to the drills as observers. Russia belongs to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The bloc makes it mandatory to invite observers when military maneuvers involve more than 17,000 troops. The last time an exercise of this scale was held was in 1981. But the Russian Ministry of Defense has said September's drill will be the biggest yet.
So concern for some President Niinistö about the scale of these war games, these operations and exercises being carried out by Russia. Just a few weeks ago, Russia carried out a mock invasion in the Gulf of Finland. That was in July. Now, do you believe that that was some kind of an intentional provocation by Russia?
Well, I wouldn't say so because actually, and unfortunately, we face now in Baltic Sea area a lot of military exercises which are led by Russia or NATO. And that reflects the situation that there are, tense feelings. Mm-hmm. And what we should do is trying to reduce them. And I believe that we have to be ready to talk about this and have contacts with Russians too, trying to avoid, for example, accidental events which might grow to whatever, and trying also to reduce all the tensions so that those exercises wouldn't be necessary.
Well, speaking of defence, Finland, historically a militarily neutral country, but in another big item of news in the last few days, the news that Finland is joining President Macron's European intervention initiative, a sort of military coalition of the willing, independent from EU structures. Why are you joining this?
First of all, we are not neutral. We are politically member of EU, so we are far away from neutral politically. We don't belong to NATO, but that is a different case in a way. Mm-hmm. We have been developing our cooperation with NATO. We are enhanced partner. We have a very close contact with our neighbor Sweden. We are developing defense cooperation. We have direct relations to USA. And now we have also a direct link to France. I fully support the initiative made by President Macron because the idea is to, secure European citizens, that we take care of your security. Mm-hmm. And that is most important, that you can tell people.
Well, what threats then do you see this intervention initiative as being ready to respond to?
I consider that the most important message just now is that if everyone in Europe understands that, yes, Europe has to do more to take care of its own security. That has been forgotten for decades. Mm-hmm. We thought that, the world will be wonderful forever, and it doesn't seem to be the fact. So the spirit must be found. And if we do find it, giving a strong signal worldwide that Europe is united and we do care about each other and we are strong. So we will be heard better, and that is a strategic position in itself, being strong.
And
that's what I am expecting.
And just on NATO,
Yes.
you yourself have talked about possibly joining NATO. Are you actively seeking membership? Is that a goal for you?
Like I said, we are an enhanced partner. I was also in Brussels in NATO meeting. And we have decided that we keep the door open, so we don't close it ourselves. It is possible to look for membership, but just now I don't see it is necessary, and I think that the majority of Finnish politicians do agree with me, and people too. But that doesn't stop us creating more and more cooperation between NATO countries, but in Europe too.
Well, let's look a little bit further back in time to this summer, that summit that you yourself hosted in Helsinki between the Russian and American presidents. Now, just looking at their relations with Europe, they're at a very interesting point, I think, to say the least. Just the weekend before the summit in Helsinki, President Trump called the European Union a foe, an enemy. At the press conference in Helsinki, he paid Vladimir Putin compliments. Now, the United States has been Europe's closest ally, its guarantor since World War II. Is it acceptable to have President Trump, as President of the US, call the EU a foe?
Actually, I had a possibility of meeting him before he met President Putin the same day, early in the morning, and we discussed quite a lot about Finland, about USA, about European Union too, and well, he didn't repeat anything like that to me. Maybe on the contrary, I tried to tell him how important it is to have the transatlantic relation in good care, and well, he didn't deny that. So maybe he is a bit spontaneous sometimes in his expressions.
Well, something else that President Trump expressed recently was about NATO. It is reported that Donald Trump threatened to pull the US out of NATO. He's been very publicly outspoken about believing that European countries, certain of them, are not pulling their weight, paying enough into NATO. Did Donald Trump confirm to you that he is still committed to NATO?
Yes, he has been pointing out very logically all the time that you should also take responsibility to other NATO members, and that is how he measures it, by that 2% per GDP. And well, in Brussels, I didn't hear him threatening that they would go out, but nevertheless, he was pushing hard, that other countries would well, put more money on their own defense, which also serves, surely, NATO. And that was the discussion we had also. And I would like to add that when I said that we Europeans maybe lived in a way in too good circumstances, or at least we were thinking that nothing bad can happen after the Cold War ended. And maybe, well, Trump has also wakened us up that, yes, you have to take care also yourself on your security.
Let's look at a couple of domestic questions just with the couple of minutes that remain to us. Within Finland, your party, the National Coalition Party, actually trails the populist nationalists Finns Party by 1 seat in Parliament. Among other policies, they don't want refugees to come to Finland. How much support do you believe that nationalist and anti-immigration views have in Finland? It is a theme across Europe.
We had a party and still have a party which, well, was very anti-migration party. It is now in governmental responsibility. Well, they have lost their support, but we have earlier on, 30 years ago, examples of a bit similar movement. They, well, grew until they were taken to governmental responsibility. And that changed everything. So at the moment, we have outside government a grouping of, let's say, 8% of voters, according to polls. That is not that much, and I just noticed that they want to make difference to the extremist movements, which is good. We don't maybe have that much extremist movements than in some Central European countries.
There have been marches recently in Finland.
We want to keep it that way.
Yes, indeed. There have been marches recently in Finland on the anniversary of Finland's first ever crime that was deemed a terrorist attack. It was a deadly stabbing by a Moroccan man. Obviously, a lot of focus on the fact that this was a failed asylum seeker in Finland. People feeling insecure. How safe is Finland from acts of terrorism?
If I give you an example, after this call, I will take my dog to a walk, and I can do it very freely. Just one security following me in 100 meters. So Finns do feel quite safe, and we want to keep it that way.
All right. Well, thank you very much, President Sauli Niinistö, President of Finland. We have run out of time. Thank you for being with us here on Talking Europe. And thank you as well very much for watching the programme. We'll see you soon for more European news on France 24.